Glory to Jesus Christ. Today is the third Sunday after Pentecost. Gospel taken from the Gospel according to St. John, chapter 6. A very critical chapter to read if we are to understand the life of the church and Qurbana especially. Where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. You know, a lot of times when we learn our Sunday school or when we learn our Bible, we often learn things and stories from the Old Testament, and then we learn a lot about the life of Christ. And what the church wants us to do is look at the Old Testament through the eyes of Christ, like putting on some glasses to see, putting on the lens of Christ to see and understand the Old Testament better. Without Christ, the Old Testament stories don't make any sense. And I'll give you two that you see Jesus talk about today, in today's gospel. One of the first famous stories that we see is the story of the burning bush. Who was the person that saw God in the burning bush? Moses. Moses sees God at the burning bush, right? And he tells him, take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. And then as he's conversing with him, and God is talking to Moses in this burning bush, then Moses says, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they will ask me, what is his name? And God said to Moses, does anybody know? I am who I am. Say it again. I am who I am. And that's all he says. I am who I am. So he says, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. The name of God is I am. Another story that comes up. We all know the story of the Israelites. They were in slavery under Pharaoh. And who helped deliver them out? God delivers them through who? Moses, right? Moses takes them. And of course we know the story. What's the name of the sea that splits apart? Red Sea splits apart, right? And they get out and they're free from the Egyptians, right? They're free from the slavery of Pharaoh. And they're now in the wilderness. And as they are in the wilderness, they start to complain. They start to complain. Look, here we are. We don't have any food. What are we going to do? And they even say, it would have been better if we just stayed in slavery. At least there we had food. Even though we had to work hard and do all this slave work, at least we had food. Here we are in the wilderness, we don't have any food. So what does God do? He sends them bread from heaven, manna, which comes down daily to feed them. To feed them. Okay, so we see this bread coming down from heaven, and we see God say that his name is I am. Now you see Jesus just finished feeding the 5,000, and all these people are coming to him and following him because he just fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he says, don't worry about this bread. You're coming to me because you saw those miracles and you want to be filled with that. Don't be worried about that. I am the bread of life. And when he says I am, those who know the Jewish scriptures, those who know the scriptures, know that he's saying he is God. Because God himself says, I am who I am. So he's saying, I am God, and I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. I am the bread which comes down from heaven. Right? I am the bread which comes down from heaven. And we understand this as, and throughout the scriptures, we see Jesus say this over and over again, I am. And every time he's saying I am, he's saying, I am God. I am the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I am he. Right? I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. All of these I ams, where he's identifying himself. He's saying, don't just think of me as a carpenter's son. I am the one true God, right? Come as in the flesh. And so this is what we are called to understand. When we see this scripture passage, we are to be reminded of God's encounter with Moses, where he says, I am who I am. And we're to be reminded of the wilderness, because we are all now freed from slavery of death. And now we're in the wilderness. We are in the wilderness, waiting for the promised land of the kingdom. That's the point. It's not about just the stories of the Israelites. It's about now, for us. That we are now the chosen people of God in this wilderness, and we complain. When we try to live the Christian life, when we try to follow God, we complain, oh, it's better without all of these things. I'm still suffering. I'm still going through all this. And God is sending us heavenly bread on this altar every time. He's feeding us. And that's actually what we call the Qurbana. The food for the way. The provisions. Variyaharam. Right? The food for the journey. Because we're on the journey to the kingdom. Right? This is the food. And this is what we're called to really be coming to gather for. Right? Is the food. And I just want us to understand, sometimes I think when we say I'm going to go take Qurbana, I think, that almost becomes like we don't really know what we're saying. Sometimes I almost want to change that. We should talk almost differently. I'm going to take the bread of life. Right? There's something very powerful. I'm going to take the living bread of life. God himself. That's what I'm going to take. Sometimes we just say, I'm going to take Qurbana. Are you taking Qurbana? Are you taking... I'm taking the bread of life. All this other stuff I consume won't fill me. I'm taking the bread of life. And that's what I want even our children to know. When you come to Qurbana, I'm coming to take the bread of life. And that's why, somebody asks, a lot of times parents will ask me when they come visit our church, how's your Sunday school program? I said, we don't, and I always shock them. Because I said, we don't have a Sunday school program. What? It's all about the Sunday school program. I was like, is it? Is it about the Sunday school program? We have a church school program. So what's that? So we come on Saturdays, a couple times a month. We gather. I like it because we get to really spend time with the kids. We focus. We have fun. And I get to be with them. And we get to pray together. They lead the prayers. And they just get a good fellowship. And it's really fun. They have snacks. And it's fun. It's really fun. And they're not tired because after Qurbana they may be tired. And it's really fun. Oh, but Ajahn, what about schedule? I was like, well, guess what? It's hard to be a Christian. It's hard to worship. It's got to be inconvenient. It's going to be hard. You got to prioritize your life. That's what we want to teach people. We want to teach the kids. Prioritize your life. You got to. That's what it's going to be. You prioritize Christ and His church, or other things fill up, and we don't get the bread of life. That's what we should be showing to our next generation. And sometimes it's really troubling to me when I hear about, because I talk to other Ajahns and other people about how to minister to the children and what they do. And sometimes they'll tell me, oh yeah, Ajahn, we do it after church. We do Sunday school after church. I said, most may do after or before. They do after church. I say, okay, what happens? Well, basically the parents all come at the end of Qurbana. They come at the end and they have their kid go to Sunday school, and everybody's missed Qurbana, but they have Sunday school. But it's like it's like reading the menu without eating the food, right? That's what it is. You're reading the menu, you're looking at the pictures, you're learning about it, but you're not eating the food. That's what we're doing when we do that, because we don't give them the food that God is giving us. That's what we're doing. And then some churches will, they'll tell me, okay, so what we did was we put the Sunday school in the beginning of during morning prayer or before morning prayer. We do it in the beginning, right? We do that. So it's like, I'm asking them, right? I'm like, so you're telling me they have to come at 8 in the morning? How many people come at 8 in the morning for Sunday school? It's like, I don't know, maybe 50%. It's hard. I don't blame them. It's a hard struggle to come that early. I know how hard it is to bring kids at 8 in the morning for Sunday school. How do you get it? So there's a lot of people don't come. But here's the real thing. Because they say, oh, we do that so that they stay for Qurbana. But guess what? Parents are smart now. What do? They drop off the kid for Sunday school, and then they pick up the kid and just leave and miss Qurbana. That's what's happening in a lot of places. They do that. So either way, they're missing Qurbana. And it's just troubling me. And I want people to know, even our kids to know, when you come to church, it's to participate in Qurbana. It's to receive the bread of life. It's to worship together. And that's the purpose. That's what it's about. It's about worshiping, coming together. That's what the early church did. If you'd look at Acts chapter 2, verse 42, that's what they did. They had the apostolic doctrine, they had fellowship, they had the prayers, and the breaking of the bread. Those are the things that define a church. Apostolic doctrine, fellowship, the prayers, the breaking of the bread. Those are the things that we need to be always focused on. Those are what we need to bring people for. And it's interesting when you read that story of the Old Testament where God is giving the manna. He's giving, and he says, you can take as much as you want. Every day I'm going to give you, and you can take as much manna as you want, as much bread as you want. And the Israelites were taking and eating and eating and eating. But he says to them, don't save any. I'll give it to you the next day. Right? So they couldn't save it. They could eat as much as they want for that day, and then they couldn't save it. And you have to give it and then the next day. And what would happen is some of the Israelites took it and saved it. They're like, well, what if God doesn't show up the next day? So they took it and saved it. And they saved it. And it was interesting. Every morning, the next day, it says, it all got rotten and spoiled. They couldn't save it. They had to trust every day. And it's the same thing with us. For us, it's not about taking Qurbana one time and we're done. Sometimes I see that with kids. They take it at their baptism and then they don't take it again for years. And it's like, no, we're supposed to take it often. Every Qurbana that's offered, especially every Sunday. At least minimum once a week, a Christian is supposed to take Qurbana if they can. If they can, right? Try to take, unless our health prevents us from taking it regularly. But we should try our best if we can't make it to the church. But if we can make it to the church, that's what it is. And it's interesting for me to see this. Kids play in the church, right? Especially in our church. I want them to be in the front, and I want them to be participating and just doing in their way, right? But it's interesting to me to see this. In my years as a priest, I've seen this. Whatever playing they do, when it's time to come for Qurbana, they have a seriousness about that. They play about a lot of stuff. They run around, they crawl around, all that, I get it. But whatever reason, when they come for Qurbana, they somehow know God is there. Even kids with special needs, I see this. God is there. And there's some sort of, it's almost like we're recognizing our Creator. We recognize who He is. And for a moment, you just see it. Right? I'm seeing that. Even little ones, infants, 2-year-olds, whatever. They just have this sense of, there's something important here. It's not time to play. Let me take this Qurbana, and then I go play. Right? But they have that. And I want that to be continued. Right? That's what it's about when we come to worship. So really the question for me is when we go to the church, am I being fed? Am I being fed with the teachings of the church? Am I being fed in every homily, every sermon? Am I being fed with the body and blood of Christ? Right? About being fed. About being nourished by God in the word and in the breaking of the bread. I am the bread of life. Baruch More. May all glory be to the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and always, forever.